Leave that blind old woman alone. She is cursed. Don't bring problems to us all because of your unsolicited kindness. I'm warning you, leave that blind old woman alone. I don't know why you keep giving her food every day. It's not like your own family even have enough to eat.
The old woman was already there when the market woke up. She was always there before anyone else, sitting on a flat gray stone at the far edge of the Kessa market. Her back was bent forward, and her blind eyes were open, but very still. Her hands remained folded in her lap, like she was waiting for a meeting that had been scheduled long before any of them were born. Nobody knew when she arrived each morning, and nobody cared enough to find out. Her name was Mama Era. The children of Kessa had different stories about how she lost her sight. No one knew the true story, because the adults only made up stories to prevent their children from meeting the old woman. In fact, the adults had stopped telling stories about her altogether. That was worse. To be feared was one thing, but to be forgotten while still breathing was a cruelty the village had perfected without even trying. Alice was 19 years old the first time she set a bowl down in front of Mama Era. It was leftover millet porridge, still faintly warm, wrapped in a cloth to hold the heat. She didn't say anything grand. She just crouched down, placed the bowl within reach of those folded hands, and stood back up. Mama Era's fingers found the bowl slowly. She didn't speak, but she ate. Alice walked away almost immediately and went about her day. That was how it started. Nothing dramatic. Just a girl who noticed that a woman was hungry and did the only thing that made sense to her. What happened next would change Kessa forever, but nobody knew that yet. Not Alice. Not Mama Era, and definitely not the village that was about to make the worst mistake of its comfortable, well-fed life. Stay with us, because this story is going to go somewhere you do not expect. If you're new here, you're welcome. Please subscribe to this channel and turn on post notifications, because the stories we tell here will stay with you long after you hear them. And wait until you hear what happened next, because this is only the beginning. Now let us get back to Kessa, because things are about to get much worse before they get better. Alice came back the next morning, and the morning after that. By the third week, the market women had noticed. By the fifth week, they had started gossiping. Alice. It was Mama Adeze who called her name like that, like a warning dressed up as a greeting. Mama Adeze was the wealthiest trader in Kessa Market, a woman whose wrapper was always freshly pressed and whose voice always landed just loud enough for an audience. She was standing with two other women when Alice passed with the morning's portion. You are going to that woman again? Alice kept walking. Good morning, Mama Adeze. I am talking to you. Mama Adeze stepped forward, planting herself in the path. Do you know what people are saying about you? They are saying you have been bewitched. That the old woman has put a hook in you and is reeling you in slowly. She lowered her voice, but not really. Leave that woman alone. Don't you know she is cursed? She doesn't have any family members in this village, and rumor has it that she brings bad luck to anyone who helps her. Just leave her alone before something evil befalls this village. She brings bad air wherever she sits. Alice looked at her. I'm only helping her. That woman is hungry. Everyone in this village has been hungry at one point. Even you too. Haven't you been hungry at some point too? Did she come to your house to feed you? The women behind Mama Adeze laughed, while Alice remained quiet. Don't let your unsolicited kindness bring doom upon us. She warned again. Alice stepped around her and kept walking away. She crouched beside Mama Era and placed the bowl down in her hand as usual. But as she turned to leave, Mama Era spoke, her voice low and dry as riverbed clay. They will not stop, the old woman said. Alice paused. I know. It will get worse before it stops, she said again. Alice nodded. I know that too. Mama Era tilted her face upward slightly, not toward Alice, but toward the sky, like she was reading something written up there. Then she nodded once, slowly, and pulled the bowl close. Alice walked back home with Mama Adese's warning voice still ringing behind her. That evening, her mother was waiting. Her mum, Chioma, was not a cruel woman. She was a frightened one, which in a village like Kessa often looked the same. She was standing at the doorway of their compound when Alice returned, arms folded, mouth tight. "Sit down," she said, and Alice sat immediately. Mama Adese's sister came to me today. At my own stall. In front of customers. Chioma's voice was quiet and sharp at the same time. She told me she has been seeing you every morning carrying food to the cursed woman at the market edge. She even asked me if all of us in this family had lost our minds, or it was only you who was just crazy. Mama, do not mama me right now, Alice. Chioma pressed her fingers to her temple. I have sold in that market for 22 years. Way before you were born. 22 years of building trust and making sure people respect this family. And now they are laughing at us because you have refused to listen to anyone. Alice was quiet for a moment. But is she not a person, Mama? That is not the question. Her mother shot back at her. It is exactly the question, Mama. Chioma stared at her daughter for a long moment. The anger in her face shifted into fear, and that was harder to watch. Alice, my daughter, that woman has been sitting on that stone for as long as I can remember, and nobody knows where she came from. Some say she is cursed and she brings bad luck. Nobody knows her people. She does not go to the elders' meetings. She does not participate in any festival. She just sits there, watching. And she cannot even see. Her voice dropped. There is a reason people keep away from her. And that reason is fear, Mama. Alice replied, calmly. It's just fear of what they don't know and what they think they know. Chioma stood up. The conversation was over in the way that conversations end when neither person has won but one person was done talking. If something happens to you, she said quietly at the door, do not say I did not warn you. She then went inside. Alice sat in the compound alone until nightfall, listening to the night sounds of Kessa, the distant drums from the other side of the village where someone was always celebrating, the low murmur of neighbors talking through walls, the crickets doing their work in the dark. She went to bed, and as usual she woke before dawn. She portioned out the morning's millet, wrapped it in cloth, and walked to the market. Months passed this way. The mockery became background noise. Mama Adese escalated twice, once dumping a gourd of water near Alice's feet while her friends watched and howled, once stopping Alice's younger brother in the road to ask him, loud enough for strangers to hear, whether his sister was being paid in curses or just collecting them for free. Alice said nothing. She brought food to Mama Era regardless. Kessa, meanwhile, was celebrating itself. The harvest that year was the fullest in a decade. The Council of Elders held a 3-day festival. Mama Adese donated 20 bags of grain to the communal store and was praised at the gathering by name twice. The village felt invincible in the way that only very comfortable places can fully convince that what they had was because of who they were. The rains came on schedule. The river ran full. Children swam in it every afternoon until their mothers called them in. Nobody looked at Mama Era Stone. Nobody noticed the small girl, 8 years old, gap-toothed, the daughter of a quiet farmer on the western edge of the village who had started watching Alice every morning from a distance. Her name was Zuri. She never came close. She just watched with the focused curiosity of a child who had identified that an adult was doing something that didn't match any story she'd been told. One morning, Zuri's mother caught her staring. She took her daughter's hand firmly and quickly pulled her in the other direction. "Don't stare at foolishness," she said. Zuri looked back once over her shoulder and saw Alice crouching beside Mama Era, adjusting the cloth around the bowl so the warmth stayed in. Mama Era was smiling. It was almost unnoticeable and gone in a second, but it was there. The first smile anyone in Kessa had ever seen on her old face. Nobody witnessed it except Zuri, who was 8 years old and didn't yet know what she was seeing. The last good rain fell on a Thursday. The village danced in it. Children ran through the compound paths, screaming with joy. Mama Adeze stood in her doorway and lifted her face to the sky like she was personally receiving a blessing she had earned. Nobody stored extra water. Nobody thought to. Why would they? Kessa had never known lack. Kessa was favored. Kessa was strong. But the rain stopped. And strangely, it did not come back. The first month without rain, the village called it a dry spell. The second month, the council called an emergency meeting, and by the third month, they stopped calling it anything and started calling each other names instead. The Kessa River, which had run full and loud every season in living memory, shrank to a thin brown thread by the third month. Then the thread broke. Where children had swum and women had washed cloth, there was now cracked white earth, split open in long jagged lines like the land itself was screaming. Wells that had never dried up began failing. First the shallow ones on the eastern edge, then the market well that the whole village shared. People started waking before sunrise just to be first in the queue at the 2 wells still drawing water, and those queues turned ugly fast, elbows, accusations. One morning a fist fight between 2 women who had been neighbors for 15 years. The crops went next. The millet curled at the tips first, then browned from the roots up, then simply stopped pretending. Farmers walked their fields in silence, crouching down to rub dead soil between their fingers as if the gesture could bring something back, but it brought nothing back. The Council of Elders met every third day. Alice's father came home from one meeting with a face that had aged 5 years in 2 hours. He sat in the compound and didn't speak through dinner. Chioma watched him and didn't ask. The council's first instinct was blame. A delegation was sent to Yumik, the neighboring village, with a formal accusation of spiritual sabotage. Yumik sent the delegation back with their shoes and a letter that was polite in tone and devastating in content, pointing out that 4 other villages in the region were experiencing the same drought and perhaps Kessa should look closer to home for its answers. The council's second instinct was money. 3 diviners were brought in from outside the region, each one more expensive than the last. They performed their readings, accepted their payment, prescribed sacrifices, goats, palm oil, white cloth, and a night of drumming. The village carried out each instruction faithfully. They drummed until their hands bled. Yet, the sky stayed clear and merciless. Mama Adeze, whose wealth had made her untouchable for so long, began to crack in small ways the village pretended not to see. Her wrapper was not as freshly pressed. Her voice, when she spoke at the market, which was barely functioning now, the stalls were half empty, and traders came less and less, had a new edge to it, frantic under the authority. She had given grain to the communal store at the start of the crisis, loudly and publicly, and that store was now nearly empty and people were looking at her like the donation had been a promise, and the promise was expiring. She redirected her fear the way frightened, powerful people always do. She found something smaller to press down on. "It is that woman," she suddenly said one evening, standing in the market square where a small group had gathered around the dying communal fire. "Think about it. She appeared from nowhere. She has no people. She sits at the edge of this village like a watcher, and we have all just accepted it. And now this. She let the silence do the work. I am not saying. I am just saying. It didn't take long before the people decided to take action. By the next evening, a group had formed. 15, maybe 20 people, not the worst of Kessa, just the most frightened, which in a crisis is the same thing. They carried no weapons, which made them feel righteous. They moved through the market toward Mama Era's stone with the specific energy of people who had decided that what they were about to do was necessary. Mama Era heard them coming, but she didn't move. Alice heard them too, from across the market where she was helping a trader pack up the last of her unsold goods. She looked up, and she saw the direction they were moving. She dropped what she was holding and walked fast, then ran, cutting through a side path and arriving at Mama Era's stone just as the group rounded the corner. She stepped in front of the old woman and stood there. That was all. She didn't raise her hands. She didn't shout. She just stood between the group and Mama Era with her feet planted and her face completely, unnervingly calm. The group slowed. Mama Adeze was at the front. She stopped 3 feet from Alice and stared at her. Move, Mama Adeze demanded. No, Alice said. Alice. This does not concern you. You are standing in front of an old woman who cannot see you coming. It concerns me. Alice replied to her. Mama Adeze's jaw tightened. That old woman is the reason this village is suffering. Everyone knows it. Step aside and let us. Let you what? Alice's voice was quiet but fierce. What exactly are you going to do to a blind old woman that will bring back the rain, Mama Adeze? Tell me. I want to hear you say it out loud. The silence stretched. Mama Adeze's mouth opened and closed. Behind Alice, Mama Era sat perfectly still, hands folded, face unreadable. You are protecting a curse, Mama Adeze finally said. But the fire had gone out of it. I am protecting an innocent person, Alice replied. Nobody moved for a long moment. Then, one by one, they turned. Not because Alice had shamed them, though she had. But they left because Alice's calm was a mirror and none of them wanted to see what was reflecting back. Mama Adeze was the last to turn. She looked at Alice with something between fury and confusion, the look of a person who had just discovered that the thing they underestimated had roots deeper than they could see. Then she walked away. Alice stood there until the last of them disappeared. Then she exhaled slowly and turned around. Mama Era's face was tilted upward again, toward that sky only she could read. Thank you, the old woman said. It was the first time she had ever said those words to Alice. In many months, through hundreds of mornings, through every bowl set gently within reach of those folded hands, she had never once said thank you. Alice crouched beside her. Are you okay? She nodded. Yes, I am. I have been fine for longer than this village has existed, Mama Era said quietly. Sit with me. Alice sat. The market was empty around them. The sky above Kessa was the deep cloudless blue of a place that had forgotten what rain felt like. Somewhere far off, a child was crying the thin, exhausted cry of hunger, not injury. Mama Era turned her blind face toward Alice. Come back tomorrow, she said. Before the sun rises. Come alone. Alice looked at her. All right. And bring nothing, the old woman said. No bowl. No food. A pause. Tomorrow I am the one who feeds you. She then turned her face back to the sky. Alice walked home in the dark, through a village that was slowly forgetting who it had been, and had no idea that everything was about to turn on the faithfulness of one quiet girl who had never once asked for a reward. The next morning, Alice woke before the roosters. She lay still for a moment in the dark, listening to her mother's breathing through the thin wall between their rooms, slow and heavy with the exhausted sleep of a woman who had been so worried. She dressed quietly, slipped out of the compound without a sound, and walked through Kessa while the village was still quiet. The market was ghostly at that hour. Closed stalls, overturned gourds, the communal fire pit, cold and gray. The drought had stolen even the market's heartbeat. Traders who had set up in the same spot for 20 years were simply not coming anymore. There was nothing to sell. There was barely anything to eat. Mama Era was standing when Alice saw her in the distance. Alice stopped in her tracks, completely surprised. In over 6 months, she had never seen the old woman stand. She had always been seated on that flat gray stone, folded into herself, patient as a tree. But now she was upright, and the difference was staggering. She was taller than Alice expected. Her spine was straight as a rod. Her blind eyes were open wide, and her whole bearing had shifted into a presence so ancient and so dense that the air around her felt different, heavier, charged, the way the atmosphere changes in the seconds before lightning finds the ground. Alice walked forward slowly and stopped in front of her. Mama Era spoke without preamble. "Years ago," she began, "the ancestors sent me to Kessa. Not to be served, not to be worshipped, but to watch." Her voice was different now, still low, but layered, like multiple voices choosing to speak as one. Every village has a keeper, a soul placed among the people to witness how they treat the ones who cannot repay them. The sick, the old, the forgotten, the ones who sit at the edges. She paused. How a village treats its edges tells the ancestors everything about its center. Alice stood completely still. For years, I sat on that stone. For years, I was hungry, ignored, feared, and mocked. I watched who looked away. I watched those who crossed the road to avoid me. I watched mothers teach their children to treat vulnerability as contagion. Her voice was steady. Every year, I made my report. And every year the answer came back. The answers remained the same, not yet. The silence between them was complete. "Then you came," Mama Era said. 19 years old. Nobody told you to come, but you came because you saw a hungry woman and you had food, and the distance between those two facts was too short for your conscience to ignore. For the first time, the old woman's voice softened slightly. "You never asked my name for the first 3 weeks. Do you remember that?" Alice swallowed. "I remember. You just fed me, like I was a person and not a problem." Mama Era exhaled slowly. "That is rarer than rain." She reached into the folds of her wrapper and drew out a small clay bowl, old, darkened with age, the rim worn smooth by decades of handling. She pressed both palms into the earth at her feet, gathered a handful of dark soil, and packed it carefully into the bowl. Her movements were deliberate and ceremonial, the way you handle a thing that was wholly long before you were born. She held the bowl out toward Alice, and Alice took it with both hands. "Before sunrise tomorrow," Mama Era said, "go to the dry riverbed. Go alone. Pour what is in that bowl into the cracked earth at the river's center. Say nothing while you do it. Ask for nothing. The ancestors do not respond to transactions. They respond to trust." Her blind eyes held Alice's with an intensity that made no physical sense. "Tell no one until the rain has come. Not your mother. Not anyone. Can you do that?" "Yes," Alice said without hesitating. Mama Era nodded slowly. Then she reached out and placed one dry, warm hand against Alice's cheek briefly, the way a grandmother touches a child she is proud of and has no words large enough to hold it. "You were always enough," she said quietly. "You were enough the very first morning. She sat back down on her stone, folded her hands in her lap, and went quiet again. Alice understood. The audience was over. She walked home through the waking village, the clay bowl held carefully in both hands, her heart loud in her chest. She told no one. She sat through breakfast while her mother talked anxiously about the water queue and her father stared at the wall. She helped with the morning's chores and waited. Before sunrise the next day, she rose again, took the bowl from where she had hidden it, and walked alone to the riverbed. It was a devastating sight up close. What had been a wide, singing river reduced to a long wound in the earth, the banks crumbling inward, the bed cracked into hundreds of pale, fractured pieces like a mosaic of defeat. Alice walked to the center and crouched down. She poured the soil. It fell from the bowl in a thin, dark stream, hitting the cracked white earth and disappearing into it the way water disappears into dry ground, hungrily, instantly, as if it had been expected. Alice walked back home and said nothing just as she had been instructed. She slept. She woke to thunder so deep it moved through the floor of the house and into her bones. She heard her mother gasp in the next room. She heard her father's footsteps running to the door. Then the rain hit the roof, not gently, not cautiously, but all at once, a full-throated roar of water that made the whole compound shake with the shock of it. Alice lay in her bed and stared at the ceiling and let the tears run sideways across her face into her hair. Outside, Kessa was losing its mind. People poured out of their homes screaming. Women held their faces up to the sky with their mouths open. Children sprinted through the compound paths shrieking with a joy so pure it had no language. Farmers ran to their fields in the rain, dropping to their knees in the mud, pressing their foreheads to the ground. Old men who had not cried in decades stood in their doorways weeping without embarrassment. It rained for 3 days, nonstop. The river returned on the second day, slowly at first, a trickle feeling its way back through the cracked bed, then wider, then a rush, then the full familiar roar of water that the children of Kessa had grown up falling asleep to. The wells filled. The crops that had not fully died began their slow resurrection. The village breathed again, deep, shaking, grateful breaths. The council held a celebration. Mama Adeze hosted a feast at her compound, dressed in her finest wrapper, and stood before the gathered village to speak about faith and sacrifice and the power of communal prayer. She was applauded. She received it graciously. Alice sat at the far edge of the celebration and ate her food quietly. Beside her, uninvited but unwavering, sat Zuri, the gap-toothed 8-year-old who had been watching from a distance for 6 months. She didn't say anything. She just sat there, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Alice looked at her. Zuri looked back. They ate together in silence while the village celebrated itself. The morning after the feast, Mama Adeze found Alice at the market and blocked her path. Her voice was lower than usual, stripped of its performance. "People are talking," she said. "They are saying you did something. That you went to the river." Her eyes were sharp and searching. "What did you do, Alice?" Alice told her the truth. Simply. Completely. Without theater. The color left Mama Adeze's face in stages. Around them, the market went quiet as people turned to listen. By the time Alice finished speaking, the silence was the loudest thing in Kessa. Someone ran to the market edge, but the flat gray stone was empty. No wrapper. No bowl. No footprint. No trace that anyone had ever sat there, except that every single person in that market could suddenly see the exact shape of the absence, the specific dimensions of what they had ignored for many years. And the weight of it landed on each of them differently, but it landed on all of them. Mama Adeze opened her mouth to speak, but closed it when she couldn't find the right words. She looked at the empty stone for a long moment, and then she walked away, not with her usual authority, but carefully, like a woman navigating unfamiliar ground, like someone who had just discovered something unusual. Nobody laughed. In fact, nobody spoke. Zuri was standing at the edge of the group. She was looking at the empty stone, then at Alice, then back at the stone, and something was settling behind her young eyes, quiet and permanent, the kind of understanding that doesn't arrive loudly but never leaves. She carried it for the rest of her life. Years later, when Zuri was a grandmother herself, she would gather her grandchildren around her in the evenings and tell them about Kessa, Mama Era, and a girl named Alice who brought a bowl of porridge every morning for 6 months without applause, without reward, and how her kindness brought about great change for Kessa when it mattered the most. And she would end it the same way every time, leaning forward, her voice dropping low so the children would have to lean in to hear as she whispered. Kessa never went dry again. But every elder who lived through that season made sure their grandchildren knew that it was not their wisdom that saved them, but it was the actions of a 19-year-old girl whose kindness didn't come with any expectation, but eventually saved the dying village of Kessa. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have not subscribed to this channel yet, kindly do it now. Turn on post notifications to be notified whenever we post new videos. We always bring you heartfelt stories that the world needs to always remember. Like this video and drop a comment telling us what Alice's story taught you, and we will see you in the next one.